You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
In Psalms 139, 7 and 12, it says, "Where can I flee from your spirit? Where will I run from your presence? If I rise to heaven, you're there. If I lay down with the dead, you're there. If I take wings with the dawn and settle down on the western horizon, you're there too. With your hand you keep a firm grip on me. And if I say darkness will surely conceal me, and the light around me will become night." Yeah, even darkness isn't dark to you, and darkness and light are the same to you. I mean, he has night vision goggles that just make the ones that the government gives you is worthless. He knows us. He can be anywhere. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere.
There can be instances when you make a mistake and start acting as if no one knows about it. You may feel hidden in God's eyes while sinning and believe you have gotten away with it. Today, Pastor Ken explains how God is omnipresent. God is not limited by time or space, which allows him to be present across multiple places at the same time. Instead of trying to flee from him, you can seek his help in times of difficulty. Even when sin tries to knock you down, God can help you and show you the right path. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah chapter 40 as he begins his message, Sure, God knows all of the stars by name.
So we're still in chapter 40, and the tone has changed in Isaiah as we've gotten to chapter 40. It's not judgment, judgment, judgment all the time. Now there's other things that God's talking about. We talked a little bit about that last week. And there's an argument here in chapter 40 where we find out that God knows the names of all the stars. He keeps track of them, and he has a name for every single one. But he also is saying because of the fact that he is the God of creation, you can trust all of his promises too. So I said, sure, God knows all the stars by name, but can I trust God to keep his promises? Yeah, we absolutely can. There's no problem with that. So we're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 40, starting with verse 12, and Lord willing, get to verse 31 here before we get to done with. As we looked at last time together, the first 11 verses of chapter 40, we see that it's a recommissioning of Isaiah as a prophet. Not a problem. He is once again in front of the divine council, just as he was back in chapter 6. He also was a witness to the divine council calling and commissioning of John the Baptist. So we see that too. And as part of the commissioning, we also see there's a commission for Jerusalem to be the point of origin for good news, which is also gospel. In other words, Jerusalem will be the point of origin for the good news of Messiah going across the entire planet. And we see that as well in the first 11 verses. Now, at the end of the meeting, there is a beginning of a description just who Messiah truly is. And remember, Isaiah has already talked about the Messiah. He's already prophesied that he's coming. He's prophesied that he's going to be born of a virgin. We've already covered some of that. But for Isaiah, for Judah, and for us, everything that we just read in the first 11 verses, can God do that? I mean, and everything we've seen in the first 39 chapters, can God really do this? Can Messiah truly do as he's promised to do in verses 10 and 11? And that's a question. The idea is to lead those addressed to put aside their doubts. That's what this section is about. And agree that Yahweh can do this. He's all powerful. He's the creator of the world. And there's going to be a series of rhetorical questions that are going to show up here so that everybody kind of goes from common ground to understanding who he really truly is. Now, there's something also that Isaiah has to kind of firm up in his mind too. Remember, he's been doing all this prophecy up to this point. Now the Assyrian army has already ran away. It's like 700 BC, and he still has more things that the Lord wants him to do. But the prophecy tone is changing, and he needs to understand that everything he's prophesied up to this point is indeed going to happen. Just because the tone has changed doesn't mean that's going to change too. Yeah, I mean, remember, he just prophesied that the kings of Judah are going to wind up being eunuchs in the court of Babylon, and that means they're not going to have kids. So he's a little bit concerned about this because he's already prophesied that Messiah is going to come from the line of David. So yeah, he's being recommissioned. And he's also witnessed the recommissioning, or the commissioning of the forerunner, that's John the Baptist. And he knows everything's going to take place, but again, what about those previous prophecies? In other words, if the days of the monarchy are numbered, and everybody's going to get deported to Babylon, and all the male members of the family are going to become eunuchs, what about the royal promises? Well, not all of them became eunuchs. That's true history behind that. So plainly, Isaiah either has to take a look at it and say, I've got to change my previous prophecies, or look for further truth, or God's going to confirm. Well, God's going to confirm that everything he's already said is indeed going to happen. Now, we forget, because we read the scriptures and we go, prophets, oh yeah, if you're a prophet of God, that means you're superhuman. Not hardly. Remember a guy by the name of Elijah who went running off to hide in a cave somewhere in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula because he was afraid of a woman named Jezebel? He did that. They're human, and they have questions, and some of them didn't quite understand everything that they were prophesying, and that's okay, but they did have questions. And I look at this and I say, if I was in the same situation as Isaiah, I'd have questions too. I'd want to know. And God, as a result of that, is actually coming to try and help Isaiah understand some of what's going on. Now, the Lord understands this, and not only for Isaiah, but also for the people of Judah, and for us too, reading it 2,700 years later. The promises made are indeed guaranteed promises. They will take place. Well, how firm are they? Well, they're guaranteed, and we're going to see that we're guaranteed because the Lord's the creator. He rules the whole creation. He can't forget his people. He won't forget his people. We're going to see when we get to chapter 41, he's the God of history, the Lord of history. He directs everything in history. When I took history, they didn't say anything about the Lord being in control of history. They just said there's a cycle to, anyway, they said there's a cycle to history, but we don't understand why. And I'm going like, well, I understand why. But he's also going to expose the world idolatries too. So, and then at the end of chapter 41, we get consolation, but that's yet to come. So we're starting in verse 12, and we're going to read a series of rhetorical questions that come from the Lord. And these are similar because when you start reading this, you go, somebody else has had questions like this too. Yeah, his name's Job. Job, when he was being counseled by all of his really fine counselors, they're not good counselors, he comes up to chapter 38, verse 1, and then the Lord answers Job out of the whirlwind, and he starts asking these questions. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I'll question you, and you make it known to me. So, those questions get asked of Job, and they're also going to be asked here rhetorically to Judah, to us, to Isaiah. The point is to prove something. God is God, okay? And he won't change at all, ever. So we'll pick up in verse 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Okay, so we're talking right here. And God is saying, who's done that? And marked off the heavens by a span. A span is this right here. And calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance and the hills in a pair of scales. Who's directed the Spirit of the Lord? Or as his counselor has informed him? These are crazy questions, right? Well, these are rhetorical. You're coming up with the answers even as we go through it. With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding, and who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands like fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are nothing before him, and they're regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. And when he uses the word meaningless, it's the same word that you see in Genesis, which is where God says, in the beginning he created the world, and it was without form and void. And it's that same Hebrew word, tohu, that he's using here. In these series of questions, we actually encounter the attributes of Yahweh, the attributes of God. We start seeing those, and for a Jew who's reading this and hearing this, he's going to start rehearsing these in his mind. He's going to start going through some of the attributes of God. It's a theme that's so complex when you start looking at the attributes of God. This one feeds to this one, which feeds to this one. They all feed upon each other, and all we can do is get close or approximate, because what we're trying to do with the attributes of God is describe God in terms that you and I can understand. And it's tough to do. Now, The closest that we can get to what an attribute of God is this characteristic. It's part of God's nature. It's an essential trait of God. We can also call it a name of God, a perfection of God, a property of God, but I mean, you can keep going and going and going and going. I looked at like 5 or 6 different books from 5 or 6 different time periods, and they all had different definitions for attribute. So we'll use the term attribute. So what can we see in terms of the attributes of God in these rhetorical questions? And I started looking at it that way, and I said, you can see a lot of them, quite a few actually. God begins by outlining a simple fact that even in the 21st century, we still need to understand. And it's a very simple attribute of God. God is the creator. He made everything. There's nothing he didn't make. It didn't wind up being a salamander crawling out of an ocean, and we're not some monkey's uncle, okay? It just doesn't work out that way. His decision and actions to create the heavens and the earth actually reveal multiple attributes of who God actually is. So we take a look at verse 12 again, and we say, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Now, God is not a giant, okay, that can hold all of the water of planet Earth in the palm of his hand. He's not. But what we're seeing here is what's called in the Bible an anthropomorphism. An anthropomorphism is when the Bible starts talking about God in human terms so we can kind of understand who he is and what he does. And he does this all the time. And then he says, and by the way, I'm perfect. I'm going like, I'm not. It kind of blows it right out of the water. But God does this all the time. He doesn't have a body of a giant or anything like that, but he's giving terms that if you were on a construction site and you were talking to somebody and he's the designer of the building, he said, yeah, I had all that design right here in the palm of my hand. No, you didn't. It's Hoover Dam. You didn't have it right here, but you may have had the designs in here and you put it together. It's that kind of thing. So we're seeing that and some figures of speech here as well. But he says, who's measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, marked off the heavens by a span? God's hand is not so large that he does this and all of the universe is in between this finger and this finger. Or is it? I don't know. I mean, yeah, he's a spirit, and we know that. That's what the Bible says. He calculates the dust of the earth by a measure. I mean, could he take all the dirt of the earth and put it, let's see, I've got 200 trillion pounds of dirt. I don't know. I don't think so. But he knew what he needed, is what is coming across. So the Bible tells us that God, the Father, is a spirit. It says that in John 4:24. So he doesn't have a body just like we do. But we do understand what the Lord is telling us through the prophet Isaiah, that God is great. In fact, he is so great, so dominant over all creation that we should just stand back in awe at his power and glory. And instead, what do we do in our generation? We stand back and question the whole thing. Well, how could God have made that? How could God have done this? We should find ourselves, just like the faithful members of the divine council did, in awe of him. And we see that in Psalm 29. In Psalm 29, we have a picture of the divine council honoring God and being told to honor him. It says, honor the Lord, you heavenly beings. Honor the Lord for his glory and strength. Honor the Lord for the glory of his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord echoes above the sea. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty sea. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord splits the mighty cedars. The Lord shatters the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon's mountains skip like a calf. He makes Mount Hermon leap like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with bolts of lightning. The voice of the Lord makes the barren wilderness quake. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists mighty oaks and strips the forest bare. And here's our reaction to all of this about the glory of God and how great he is. He is the creator. It says, in his temple, everyone just shouts glory. They don't have anything else to say. They just go, glory, it's God. Can't be anybody else. And then we see the Lord rules over the floodwaters. So even during the flood, he's ruling over the floodwaters. He reigns as king forever, and he gives his people strength and blesses them with peace. So what we're being introduced to here in Isaiah is a small construction project known as the creation of the entire universe. All of it envisioned by, planned by, and then implemented by God. He did all of it. It's not like something that I know as a kid I used to think, well, when God created the earth, he just woke up and said, well, today I think I'll make the world. No, he didn't. It was all planned. And as you start examining it, and I provided some additional information in an appendix so that you can look at it, as you start to look at it, everything starts fitting in because God planned it. He planned it very carefully because it's a large project. I mean, if you're planning to build Hoover Dam or you're planning to build a skyscraper or whatever, you've got a lot of planning and designing and drawings and so forth that you have to do just to get to the point of being able to turn dirt. Well, God's the same way, and there's a lot of design and planning that went into this. The project that he had is the creation of the universe. Everything. The heavens, to include the heavenly host, all the angels, all the divine beings, he made them all, even though some of them have rebelled. The observable universe, so everything that you see when you walk out at night and you look at the stars, he made all that. Space and time. He created time too. So when you feel like that time is slipping by too quickly, God made that, okay? He's the one that made it so that we can only go this way, not that way. I'd like to go that way sometimes. He also created a home for his planned creation of mankind. And the way that he did that, he did it in such a way where he and his heavenly creation, those heavenly hosts, and his earthly creation could all live together in a place called Eden. That was his intent. And the amazing thing is that when you look at it from a scientific perspective, per Barrow and Tipler, for example, they came out with a principle called the anthropic cosmological principle, that everything is tuned for life to take place in the universe in only one place, here. The anthropic principle states that the universe was fitted from the very first moment of existence for the emergence of life in general and for human life in particular. The astronomer Robert Jastrow noted that the universe is pre-adapted to the eventual appearance of humanity. Any variation from the Big Bang, that's the moment of creation, life is not possible. It's just not possible. So as you take a look at this, and I've did a little bit of additional research into it, when you look at the anthropic cosmological principle and you start looking at how it works in space-time and how all of this begins to fit together, it becomes, well, what we see is this. One, it obeyed God's original spoken commands. When he said, let light be, it happened. Two, everything came into existence out of nothing, and God did that. It's called creatio ex nihilo modus operandi. There you go, there's your Latin for the day. And three, everything was configured over the course of some undetermined period of time. Well, the Bible says 6 days, but a scientist will say, well, it's an undetermined period of time. It's 6 days. It says the word in the Bible is yom. It means a 24-hour day. But the universe was seen to have been anthropically engineered by God for the sake of the creation of human beings, which, of course, we were created. So the world, where it's located in the universe, how everything is tuned together, all of the different things for the universe, it can only mean that God created it, God did it, and there's only one place that life can exist, and that's right here. So I've given you some additional information that you can take a look at your leisure. It's just 25 things that kind of point to the fact that, yeah, it's God. God did this. These are must-have values that fall within a narrowly defined range for life to exist. If you don't have them, life doesn't exist. But as we read this and contemplate what it means in relation to Yahweh, we realize that his unspoken desire is for us to contemplate all of who he is. And that's why he starts off with, I'm the creator. Because there's a lot of attributes that tie into the fact that he's the creator. I mean, he's glorious. He thought about us. And then he made us in his image. So verse 12, again, who's measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens by the span, and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance and the hills in a pair of scales. So as we look at God as creator, the first thing that comes across is God's all-powerful, because nobody could talk the universe into existence unless he was all-powerful, right? So he's omnipotent. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the most exquisite expression of omnipotence I can think of. He is all-powerful. He's sovereign. He made everything. It all belongs to him, all of it. In Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 12 to 13, it says, "It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens. When he utters his voice, there's a tumult of waters in the heavens, and he makes the mist rise from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain, and he brings forth the wind from its storehouses." He made everything, and he's sovereign over it. Oh, by the way, and there's something else. He holds it all together. He's pure actuality. He exists independent of. Nothing had to happen for him to exist. And he's independent of anything else. And everything that exists, though, depends on him. And that's what it says in Ephesians. It says we are held together by him, and we have to rely upon him. By the way, do you know he knows everything? He's omniscient. Because as Jesus told us in Matthew 6:8, don't be like those who are unbelievers. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And sometimes when I'm praying, I'm kind of like, Lord, you know that thing we were talking about the other day? Or I want to talk to you about this, but you already know. But he still wants to talk to us about it. He wants relationship. He wants to get to know us. He wants us to get to know him as who he really is. He already knows us better than we know ourselves. And here's the exciting point. Even though he knows us better than we know ourselves, Jesus still died on the cross for us. Wow, that's something else too. But he's omniscient. He's omnipresent. Now, that's tough to deal with. A guy by the name of Jonah thought that maybe he wasn't over in Tarshish. He was. He was also in this fish too. In Psalms 139, 7 and 12, it says, "Where can I flee from your spirit? Where will I run from your presence? If I rise to heaven, you're there. If I lay down with the dead, you're there. If I take wings with the dawn and settle down on the western horizon, you're there too. With your hand you keep a firm grip on me. And if I say darkness will surely conceal me, and the light around me will become night," even darkness isn't dark to you, and darkness and light are the same to you. I mean, he has night vision goggles that just make the ones that the government gives you is worthless. He knows us. He can be anywhere. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere. And that's according to his being, and not just according to his operation either. If you really want to get into it, he is essentially or substantially not only dynamically omnipresent, he's also essentially and substantially omnipresent. What does that mean? Well, that means he's here, but even though he's here, he's there, and he's everywhere at the same time. I can't be. It's like having a computer program with multiple instances. I've got it operating here and I've got it operating there, but what about the in-between? Well, no, it's only where the two terminals are. Well, God would be everywhere. He's not just at those two terminals. God is wholly present throughout all things, yet he's distinct from all things. And here's the interesting one. The presence of God throughout the whole of space is not by local diffusion, multiplication, or distribution. He is spirit. He's not subject to the laws of matter like we are. He can't be divided. He can't be separated. And one part of his being is not here and another part not there. So if I'm in California, he's there. If I'm in Florida, he's there. He's in both places at the same time. And by the way, if you're in the International Space Station, he's also there at the same time. He's at all places at the same time. And that's tough to understand for us. At least for me. I've got a little brain. It's hard to get.
It's true that some of us are introverts and some of us are extroverts. But did you know Jesus designed us to function best when we're part of a community? We all have God-given gifts and abilities that, when used rightly and in conjunction with others, the effect for the kingdom of God will be profound. It will reach many who are lost and hurting. So, listeners, if you don't have a community that you belong to, won't you consider getting connected with ours? Or at least learning what we believe and why? The UnsafeBible.com has all that information, and we'd encourage you to read what's written there and then spend some time in prayer. The Unsafe Bible is a radio ministry based out of Jupiter, Florida. And we're so glad that you've paused long enough to listen to today's message from Pastor Ken. If you like what you heard today, and we've piqued your curiosity, why don't you satisfy it by checking out all the other messages we have for you? Go to the unsafebible.com and click on the Media tab. That's the direct link to our archive. We trust that what you find there will challenge and grow your faith. While you're there, be sure to check out the other ways to stay connected with what's happening here at Calvary Chapel, Martin County. Would you rather enjoy connecting through social media? You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Pick your favorite platform, or utilize all three. We trust that today's message from Isaiah spoke to your heart and challenged the parts of you that aren't looking like Jesus. Thanks for listening to the UnSafe Bible.